奴らが災いを生み出し、戦争を引き起こした元凶なのか。万物の進化は絶対の摂理。そうだというのに、ライン生命はそれを改変し、支配することまで目論んでいる。愚かな。
Our story begins with Surya, who abruptly left Rhine Labs and is currently working with Rhode Islands to find a cure for Ifrit. During her interview with Dr. Kalstedt, Surya told her everything she knew about Rhine Labs, that Ifrit was a ticking time bomb, Rhine Lab is covering everything up, and Silence is completely in the dark about all of this.
ライン生命を離れた理由、いろいろあったから何から話せば。サリアって名前聞いたことある？彼女は私と同じ元ライン生命の科学者で、そして私と一緒にイフリータを生み出した人物。彼女がロドスにイフリータに会いに来たのかな。あの時は振り返りもせずに出て行ったのに、どうして？
この声は
イフリータはサリアに合わせない。それがイフリータのためだから。私を信じて。
ロドスの皆さんにとってここが第二の故郷になってくれたら嬉しいな。
Silence was very close to Saria when they were working in Rhine Labs. We know this because Saria has a feather charm from Silence, and according to Silence token, these feather charms are a sign of sincerity. And although now there is a lot of disparity between the two, Surya still wears the feather charm.
サイレンスと口論しているところを見た？いつものことだ。いや、すまない。ロドスにもお前にも迷惑をかけたな。
It was obvious to everyone in Rhode Island though that Silence still hated Surya, and the conflict between Silence and Surya most likely started with the Flame Demon incident. The key figures in this incident is Silence, the project head, Ifrit, who was the primary patient, and Saria. During one of the experiments, Ifrit went out of control. The reason was never specified, but in response, Saria, and I quote, suppressed the experimental unit. Right after the incident, Saria vanished.
悪意のやつにジロジロ見られんの一番嫌いなんだ。お前のことだよ、お前。みんなあっち向いてろ。近づくな。お前こんなに近づいて何する気だ。まさかお前も俺様を実験台に。
Ifrit was an artificial creation of Rhine Labs. She was created by Rhine Labs as a biological weapon, perhaps one to retaliate against the gods. Surya warned Rhode Island that if Ifrit went out of control, Rhode Islands could be destroyed. She spent her entire life confined in Rhode Island, and she always had multiple tests and was examined and monitored by scientists and doctors. This contributed to Ifrit's hatred for lab coats, why she often exhibited childlike behavior, and why she could not distinguish what was right from wrong. Her medical examinations are also unreadable, and her race was only deemed to be Sarkas because her previous records in Rhode Island said so. Although we do know that there are more than two types of Sarkas, such as the Wendigo, most of the Sarkas will either fall under the subspecies vampire or are horned Sarkas. So for the horned Sarkas, like Nightingale or Meteorite, they will usually have very smooth horns. But if you look at Ifrit's horns, they are squared and more jagged. Her tail is also very square and jagged. So she is either a unique race of Sarkas or she isn't Sarkas at all. The project which Silence was heading was to help Ifrit reduce her already high cell-originium fusion rate and ultimately to alleviate the world of oripathy. Ifrit was merely her patient and she had nothing to do with her creation. Saria, on the other hand, seems to be involved in the creation of Ifrit.
お前も研究者として禁忌に触れる実験に手を出したことは？いや、していなければそれでいいんだ。
はい、何でしょう。
イフリータに伝えてくれ。これから何が起きようと私が守ると。
あなたの命令とあらば、何があっても従いましょう。
Ifrit doesn't resent Saria, only Silence does. Ifrit even talks about Saria and Silence after you reach a certain level of trust with her in Arknights.
サイレンスとサリア、なんで喧嘩してんの？わけわかんねえ。おい、なんか止める方法ねえのかよ。教えてくれって。サリアが来てた？俺様にも合わせ。サイレンスがダメだって？いいじゃん、こっそり連れてってくれよ。
Ifrit's growing oripathy rate is alarming, but she is being monitored by Rhode Island and Silence, and they hope to find a way to cure her and oripathy, eventually. The real goal of the project, which started the Flame Demon incident, is only known by a few. Other Rhinelab operators such as Mir do know that Silence had a project, and after a terrible experiment, she disappeared, but they didn't know the details of the project. I quote from Dr. Calcit, Mir often feels a sense of regret when reminded of this instance, but had she known the true goal of the project, she would have pulled the plug herself. Ifrit's weapon was created by Rhinelab, and Rhode Island questions why she was given such a dangerous weapon. Ifrit was childlike and immature, but in a battlefield, she was able to annihilate enemies with just her instincts, as if it was the only thing she could do. This further backs up the theory that Ifrit was created by Rhinelab as a weapon. We do know that Rhinelab is plotting something very big, and they have been developing several weapons, not just Ifrit. For example, when you promote Scarpe, he mentions his device costs him more than 2 years of his salary.
2年分の貯金をはたいて借金まで背負ったんだ。こいつが値段以上の代物じゃなかったら、俺はとっくに闇市のコータス悪徳商人に最高戦に入れられてどっかに飛ばされてたよ。今でも心地よい日々を過ごせているのはこの漏電する相棒のおかげさ。
This weapon was a failed prototype created by Rhinelab. We know this from checking the weapon's model. While there was a discussion about the weapon, Scarpe explained Rhinelab's logic in creating weapons. And I quote, "On this land, there are always gifted people. It is a pleasure to customize weapons for them. When the weapon has been created and great power is shown through the gifted, everyone will desire it. But if you give these weapons to ordinary people, they are less useful than an axe. What Rhinelab wants is one thing. Create an ultimate weapon, then materialize it as an axe." Dr. Calcit suspects that Rhinelab is looking to find a target to experiment on, and ultimately to create a legendary weapon, one that can quote-unquote kill the gods. Ifrit was most likely one of these experimental weapons created by Rhinelab, and if you think about it, anyone who could manipulate Ifrit could easily utilize her fire arts. You didn't need to be special. You didn't need to be a gifted operator such as Chen or Scarpe. Ifrit herself was the weapon. She was very easy to provoke and manipulate due to her childlike characteristics. Surya, likely realizing that they were not trying to cure oripathy, but rather to create a weapon, left Rhinelab. This doesn't change the fact that she was one of the people responsible for Ifrit's creation. Silence wouldn't even let Ifrit and Surya talk out of her hatred for Surya, as well as the fear that she might take Ifrit.
Yet your presence seems to shelter me from the cold. Like the glitter in the snow will eventually fall. Despite the beauty surrounding it all.
すぐに終わる。